then created a rather stable pattern to lure the mind away from its own negations, to conquer step by step the primary fallacies of the mind, to achieve ultimately the overcoming of the ultimate fallacy of the mind, which is the fallacy of selfness. This in itself must lead then to that which is beyond self, that is the Atman, or the reconstruction of man's relationship to the concept of self, so that self is no longer the personal being, but the universal being, and that allegiance is transferred from the will of the individual to the silent will of space itself. As we know that the end of yoga is union through liberation, we can only safely assume that the steps of yoga are steps toward liberation by the mind overcoming its own previous fixations. These fixations being due largely to the symbolic testimony of the senses. Therefore, one of the sensory perceptions is associated with each of the chakras. And the victory over that testimony of the senses achieves ultimately the victory over the error or the false premise which this has set up in the mental equipment of the individual. On this basis, therefore, it can be quite definitely pointed out that the true chakras are in the mind. And the mind, because it occupies an area in juxtaposition with the brain, we may say, for general purposes, that the true chakras are in the 7 important nerve centers of the brain. That the brain, therefore, extends these down through the bodily system itself. Now, one of the points that is very interesting about mental phenomena, which I think we all have begun to realize, is that this phenomena is substantial in its own realm of energy. We can see this mysterious fur-like nervous emanation which comes around the body of man, so that also inwardly, when seen from the level of neural vitality, the whole body is a glowing network of nerves. These nerves have their own light and light color in themselves. And they have very much the color which we most commonly associate with nervous energy, and that is a yellow or luminous golden color. Seen, therefore, from the level of nervous energy itself, by extrasensory perception, the entire body is a glowing mass of this yellow light. Now, the sensory perceptions arose from the structure of organs. The arterial structure of organs became in turn the archetype for the neural structure of sensory perceptions. Therefore, the vital organs of the body are also associated with our nervous organs, which are the chakra centers, which correspond to the physical organs of the body. Thus, as the nervous complex develops, as the individual becomes more and more involved in the development of his highly structured nervous system, we perceive a structural development within the nervous nature itself. And we find emerging in the nerve field of the human body, when seen as luminosity, that there are these so-called 7 fountains of constantly pulsing nerve energy, and that these 7 fountains represent the principal divisions into which nerve energy can be divided. These, again, result in a psychological situation, because the nerve energy being septenary, the upper 3 parts of the septenary constituting the higher nerve energy, we generally term today as mental energy. The lower three parts we then also consider to be nervous emotional energy. And the middle point corresponding to the sun, the fourth from each end in this septenary, the sun itself, represents the pure energy of the nervous system. Thus, the nervous system is polarized. And the problem that psychology works with in its effort to understand the situation is that there is a mental nervous energy and an emotional nervous energy. These are both out of equilibrium. And the only thing that is in true equilibrium is pure nervous energy itself, which corresponds to the heart as being the center or balance of the neural field. Nervous energy, as we function with it in the body, has to have a kind of link with matter, a link which corresponds very closely in relation to the arterial venous system with the lymphatic system. And we have to have the equivalent of the nerve lymphatic. This nerve lymphatic has to function in two ways. One, it has to unite the two principal nervous systems, which correspond to the two principal systems of blood. It has to link the cerebrospinal and the autonomic processes, which are merely two directions of nerve energy. Also, both parts of the nervous field, the total nervous field, must be linked with the physical body by a series of binders. For the nerve energy cannot affect matter or a material physical structure unless there is a link by means of which these two are related together. Now, the link that is known to antiquity, the classical link between these two, is a kind of magnetic field which partakes somewhat of the nature of nerve energy and somewhat of the nature of matter. We have to have a structure which corresponds with the mysterious aether or akasha of the ancients. This is the fluid mist, the airy water, the subtle matter, the agent which carries within itself the power to link the two opposites. It must therefore lie between them. And in this we have what the old alchemists and the medieval Rosicrucians referred to as the etheric binder. This etheric binder was sufficiently subtle to take into itself nerve energy, and sufficiently gross to be able to communicate this nerve energy to matter. It formed the bridge, a kind of antascarana between these two fields of existence. So wherever nerve functions in body, nerve force, moving through nerve structure into body, there has to be these links. The nerve energy itself is one thing, the nerve tube through which it passes is another. The nervous energy is one substance, the tube is another. Thus, the channel belongs to the body and the energy does not. And the energy must be channeled in this tube by means of the so-called etheric binder. The interesting thing that we now come to in connection with this situation is that the so-called etheric binder was one of the agents which a long time ago came very closely and completely under the control of the mind. Thus, the etheric binder, or this mysterious magnetic field, comes under the dominion of thought. And it is because of this that by means of the mind a series of physical phenomena can be produced. As, for example, if you have the skill and the understanding, you can cause patches of color to appear on any part of the body by sending mental energy there by direct effort. You can also stop circulation in various parts of the body or stimulate it in the same way. And if you are gifted as a magnetic healer, you may be able to send sufficient of your own magnetic energy into another body to break up congestion or to stimulate function. These processes are carried by mental intensity. And always this energy moves according to volition, according to the activating, guiding power of the agent, which in this case is man. In this same field also, we find the area of imagination. For we know that anything which the mind conjures up, nervous etheric energy can formulate into patterns or designs, so that we may create visual images. We may create symbols within our own psychic neural structure. We may also, therefore, develop the power to create various forms, and later develop the faculties to see what we have created. Every intensity of human emotion creates mathematical, geometrical, vibratory forms. Some have called these thought forms. But whatever we may want to say, every emotion and every thought has a number, a color, a form, and a sound. And we cannot escape this, no matter how hard we try. So that our thoughts become mental things. And of the mental things with which our thoughts become involved, there are perhaps none more difficult for us to live with than the products of our own negative thinking. Because in this process of negative thinking, we are working in a wonder world of mental energy. These emotion thought forms which we generate, we obviously generate within the mental nature. Therefore, these forms, whether they be mental or emotional thought forms, actually are generated within the mind itself. But because of our very natural processes of mind, we project them, just as the mind projects the chakras. And as a result of that, these forms, these thought entities, can be seen as something separate from ourselves, although they have no substance except in ourselves. We can project them. Just as, for example, if there is a phase of psychology in which we can project an image from within the subconscious and project it objectively as a visual form, and see this image as distinct and apart from ourselves. This is one type of ghost, the ghost being a reverse perception from within ourselves, projecting itself in such a way that its image is recorded in the brain at the same time that visual image of places or a place is recorded, so that we may be standing in a room which is properly recorded and sees also standing in that room a person who is not there, because the person has been imposed within the mind upon the thing actually seen by the sensory perception. Now, this, further to our purpose at the moment, simply means that if any person deeply concerned with problems such as yoga and tantra develops a certain type of mental intensification, they can cause the symbolic, diagrammatic forms of these chakras to be created in the mind. These forms can then be visualized in relationship to the body. And it is perfectly conceivable that the individual could see as a result of the imagination moving ether, which is a reflecting medium,